Okay, so we're all here for to look at Introduction to Physical 8.1. It has not been released yet. It should be released next week. I believe it will be released next week. It'd be nice if it was today, but I'm on the slow slide. I'm the one who's holding things up. So the main things coming out with this release is support for Inventor 2022 and 23. And that's basically because of model states. Model states was a major change in Inventor, and it was a major change to the API. So there was some challenges for us to get it to work, and it's working quite well right now. What we also did was we split the database. We split the SDS database, and it's been split into an application database and a user database. So this way we can have the application database managed by the IT or by your CAD manager in a read-only location where everyone can reach and read from. The user database would be usually your local area, and it would be dedicated to that user. So the user would carry those settings. So we'll talk about that a little bit later in more detail. Because of the 2023 changes and the 2022 changes, we are going to have separate installers for the two versions. So basically with model states or with level of detail, or if you prefer 2021 Inventor in previous and 2022 Inventor and onward. So we're going to have two installers now and working on that way. So this is what we're going to first talk about. What we're also going to do is just mention these documents have updated, and I'll be talking a little bit about my next webinar. So right now it looks like June 1st will be the first time I'll be able to look at that. So I'll come back to this page in a minute or two. So right here is our my new demo station I've built up. We're going to just take a look at a couple things in here. I'm going to go back into my PDFs and look at the draft release notes. So these are the release notes. Obviously, they're draft. We haven't released it yet. It should be released next week. I hope it is released next week. That's ideally, that's when it will be released. So here are the release notes. We have a, let's get it on my selection. So user-specific settings have been removed from the database. There's now two updated database, an application database and a user database. And that's a key change for us, and that allows management of the application database, and that's going to carry all the metadata for the iProperties that we want to have in all of our models. The user database is going to be the day-to-day settings that people would use. So note that the users can continue to use your current database with this release. It should be released next week for those who are late coming. And we'll have the split database. But I would recommend to migrate to the new database shortly, because I think in the long term, the databases might have changes in them, and we don't want you to stuck changing them or be surprised needing to update your database. So I would suggest you update the database when you can, but on initial install, you'll be able to use the current database. We did change some aspects to the CSV format, so it will accept all kinds of symbols on the export. If we look at the content center, content editor, when we export a file, we had some problems exporting with different symbols, double quotations or crazy other symbols, diameter symbols. We are able to accept that now on the export. On the import, we've always been able to handle it. On the export, we had some issues there. So we cleaned that up. And again, the same idea with the exporting from the BOM status tools. So what I want to do, I'm going to open up Inventor and we're going to step through and we're going to look at some of these changes. What I also want to mention, I should mention this first one at least, is that we are working with 2022 and 2023. 2023 will behave the same as 2022. So if anyone who's waiting to migrate to 2023, I would wait until they had a service pack out before you go to there, but it would work with 2023. And so far, I like 2023 a little bit better than 2022, just because maybe I'll even show you why. But let's get into this. So let's go in. I'll come back to this when I need to. So I want to come in. We have my model here. I want to close it and reopen my Inventor, and we'll start from scratch. So right now I'm running 2023 here in the view. So when we come in, I'm going to come into my 2023. Notice the icon has changed. That's Autodesk, and we'll open this up. All right. So right away we see I have show at startup. I have the two databases here. I'm going to come over to the end here of both of them. And right now, the first one is named whatever we want it to be named, just like what we had in the last release. We were able to change that name and store it wherever we wanted and have those choices. And we have a new user database. So let's take a look at those. If I come into here, what we'll have and where your database is stored on install. After it's installed, you can map them to wherever you want them to be. All right, but on install, they're going to be located same as the previous releases in the app data. So there's going to be, if you're on 2022, which will be a different installer than previous to 2021. So think of the 2022 as where it starts, or 2021 where it ends. So in here we will have the databases. So we have the application database, which can be renamed to anything. So it's as long as it has this extension, and it can be mapped in a central location for all users to look at or attached to. We have the user database, which would be mapped locally to that specific users, where their settings when they pick which cable they're using, or the depth of the ground grid is going to be stored in the user database. Note that we differentiated it by the extension. So again, you can name them whatever you want, but the extension is telling you that one is the app database and one is the user database. So that is a change there. That's what we're going to see. If you come into the old style, for those who want to remember, we only had the one database, and that would need to be saved locally to the user, and that contained all of it. And then we had that management issue where we always had to update everyone's machine if we changed something in the database. So going forward from 22 on, we don't have that issue here. We can save this anywhere we want in a central location where all people will read the same file. It can be read-only. Here we'll have this in a shared location for all the users. Shared. I'm sorry. The user database will be in the local user area for only the single user. This one can be shared for everyone. So that's a major change for us with the databases. If you want to get into the detail for those who are installing, all the files are stored in two separate folders. It's going to be, and each of these are different installs. So if you have 2021 and previous to 2021, you'll have a separate installer for that. If you have 2022 and post 2022 and beyond, you'll have a separate installer. You can install both on the same machine. So if you look here, I have 2020 on this machine, I have 2022, I got 2021, I got 2023. So I have all of them on here, and I can run SDS on any of one of these. So we have a number of customers and engineering customers typically that have a range of inventors available to them that are used to meet their customers' requirements. We'll still be able to handle that. So here, this is how we started. So I'm starting Inventor. These are the databases I'm reading. Again, this is show on startup. This can be turned off, obviously, and it can be managed by IT if we want it on or off. So here's Inventor. It looks exactly the same. Again, the software is going to behave and work very much the same if you're in the older versions of Inventor or the newer versions. A lot of the work we did is behind the scenes, and our developers did a very nice job of getting this to work with the model states and the challenges that were involved with that. So the main point of model states, as we know, we can have different model states, different instances, different suppressions, all kinds of choices in with those model states that will help us with the utility design. And that was our challenge. So if I come in here, what we had as a problem in the past when it first came out was if I wanted to run a cable from this higher assembly and place it in the lower assembly, which is the default for substation design suite, and I wanted to place this cable in here to here, let's say, it's not where it goes, but it's a big cable and it's just for display. It's able to do that. And you can see it doing a little bit of thinking, a little slower to start because of this. It's got to read in some information, but once it runs a little bit faster after that. But that is being placed in the subassembly, and that's where those challenges are. So it will work a little bit faster if you're operating in the assemblies you want it to be in, but you don't have to be. And that was our key challenge there. When we come into the model here as well, I just want to show, I want to remind people of the tools we have. I don't get to talk about the, I don't get a lot of feedback, and I don't get to talk about the MultiCable tools. So I put in my demo model these MultiCable tools. It's running a little slow because of the Zoom, and I'm on a virtual machine here as well. So keep that in mind when I'm running things. So I just want to remind people we can run multiple cables. I'm not getting much feedback. If people are doing it, I would love to hear from you how often you're doing it. So those are mighty thick cables, but it's nice to see that we can run 3, 4, and 6 paired group cables. All right. So I wanted to point that out. So really what the key thing is here is that we're working in 2023, and we're working with 2022 as well. Let's go back into my notes here. I talked about the split in the database. In 2023, you can see the number of artifacts that came out of that trying to get this to work. So there was a lot of work involved with that. We had some issues with the installs at times. So I'm going to zoom on here a bit. So template string install, we should have solved that now. We had we cleaned up the databases. We did some work and went back and forth on them. That's part of the reason I would like you guys to migrate to the new database. Again, you don't have to do it instantly, but I would recommend to do it once you migrate, and once you have some time, get that database updated to the new one. This one here is my own personal pet peeve that I'm glad it is working again. The SDS conduit tool. At one time, the 3D conduit, if you run a 3D path, if you go on our knowledge base, I have a video on it that's real nice showing. If you have create a 3D path, you can run a conduit along that 3D path and snake it around things if that's what you want to do. I think it's a nice thing to have available. It's a little bit better than using the flex tool, but it is some ways more complex because you may need a 3D sketch in it. But that will work now with any color of the content editor settings. For those who aren't familiar, just to reinforce it, if I come into my cables, at one time that 3D conduit would not work with different colors in here, right? So now it is. Let's go back into the notes. There was an error when we were adding parts to the ribbon in the content editor. That has been corrected. BOM status, export behavior and format updates. We have the BOM status tools. I did a talk on that at one time. I bring it into the training when I talk about the training. And there's I believe there's a short video on it, but these BOM status tools, this is SDS BOM and SDS BOM status. We added the SDS in the name here to make it more distinct from the Inventor BOM. So it's using the Inventor BOM in the background to populate. So this here is basically the Inventor BOM. You can see the status column is added, and this is what we work with. So if you want to know more about this, we have a video and you can always reach out to me. But the export tool now exports it with the new CSV items in there. What we also did with the item BOM status is we're able, if you pick a assembly by accident, it's not going to error out because you picked an assembly. It's really meant to pick individual parts when you bring in the BOM status. So I come up here and I have a group of parts selected. I can come up into my item BOM status, use pre-existing components, pre-selected components, and it's going to highlight all those components, and I can add them to a BOM list and export that, or use it for whatever means I need to use it for. We had a common issue here. I don't have an example of it offhand, but when we ran round bus would sometimes run in a backward angle, backward direction than what we wanted to. And that was basically because the bend length was too short. So now we can run the BOM, the bus in the correct direction now. What we also have now is that when you have a bus overhang with a bent bus pipe, it will now obey that overhang properly. It won't offset the bus. So when we're running bus, and sometimes we're running bent bus down and around a structure, sometimes we'd have to run it only from bus point to bus point. Now we can run it the way we want at the length we want with those overhangs. I had a number of service calls on that, and it's nice to have that back working. Bus union had some issues for people using the bus union of placing it correctly or not finding the bus union in the folders. So we're able to show that. I had a number of issues with lightning cone. You know, I'm putting a lightning cone in, it's not showing. So now we have a window that pops up on explaining why it's not showing. If the masts are too widely spaced and the lightning cone will not reach to its other lightning cone, you know, it's going to show an error instead. It's going to show a display window explaining the issue rather than just not doing anything. We had some issues with the IWC bus overhang in the model. So that has been corrected. It's more accurate to overhanging from our fittings. We have another issue that was coming up, that the project settings in the Inventor library would not work with a certain type of cable run. I think it was cable to pick 2 fittings to add cable. it is now not trying to write to the database or to the cable, I should say. It's not trying to write to the cable anymore. So those are the key things that we've brought out for 8.1. Again, it's going to be released, I believe, next week. We'll confirm that. I am behind in my work to help to get that released. Any questions with what we're seeing here? So you can see in the ribbon, we've changed the ribbon just a little bit. You might not see the tools that were not being used in the past. Some of them have been removed. Some of the descriptions have been updated. So we can see what is going on up here. There's nothing really changed too much in this aspect at all, just some tweaks, and that would be it. So when you're running the SDS content editor, it is only changing the application database. It is not changing the user database. When we're in Inventor and we are selecting any of these settings, all of these settings are saved in the user database. The templates are saved in the user database. Any settings with any settings. So all of these settings are being saved in the user database. Same as these.
Hey, Steve, Kevin Bacon here with Tapman Associates.
Yes.
On the application database, to confirm, that could be vaulted. Is that correct?
Yes, and that's one of the reasons we've separated them, so that, because we have a number of people who want to do precisely that. So you could put it in a vault and have it copied out to the work area and being able to map to that that location. If you have an update, the user will need to know to update it. If it's changed, it can be read-only. And that was our one of our main goals. It can also be set that the user cannot change the database. So when you come into the settings here, you can see it, startup options. We cannot change these here. The old version we could change here. We cannot change them here. But there is a switch that you can do in the registry to show that you cannot change it here either. So that IT can come in and say, you can only read that location and that location only for the application database. The user database can always be changed by the user. So I imagine a user for a company that has a lot of opcos, operation companies, user that has a lot of customers may have multiple users databases for their own. They might have different templates they want to add. They might have different paths to folders that they may want. So I can imagine that would be available as like be used in that manner. So if you have customers and you have 4 or 5 SDS databases, one for each customer, you can set that up and be able to switch from one to the other. Any other questions? So what I've done, I've updated a number of documents. These, I believe, is all of the ones I'm going to update. I may have another one to update yet that I've forgotten, but I've gone through and identified these. So I've created a new document for substation modeling strategy with levels of detail and then separate it from model states. it's a different world with model states. It's a better world. It might be more complicated, but the key thing here is that you can have one part with different tags. So instead of having in the past, we have a circuit breaker with tag, with a tag in the I property, and it's tagged to that file name. And then we have to copy that file name and create a new file name for the next one. Well, we can do that all in one file name and have multiple model states for that tagging. All right, so it will create a smaller assembly for us, and it might be performance enhancing, but it might also be workflow enhancing.
Hey, Steve, we had a question in the chat about the trench tool. I don't know if you saw that or if you need me to read it for you.
It was not, yes. So that has been corrected. That is part of the, thanks, Josh. That was part of the corrected issue with, no. It, database train install. Adding parts to SDS. It was actually part of this. I believe it was part of this one. But yes, it has been corrected. Design checks. Design checks are different workflow with design checks with model states. So I'll be doing a webinar on that. I'll talk to that in a minute. Content editor, there's some tweaks in there as well. I've added these two documents here so that it's visible to us that we can how to just about the database and that. If we want to review that, we can talk about that a little bit as well. But what I want to get into the next webinar, I hope it's going to be June. That's how far out before I can see a window of time for myself to look at it. So I'm going to be talking about design states with design checks, model states with design checks, or electrical clearance checks. So I'll be talking specifically about this type of setup. Here you can see with model states, I have one island here. I got one island assembly, and then what we see is the island assembly placed twice in here. So I got the same island assembly placed in a higher assembly. This is the same island assembly as this one. So you can see what we can do with model states. Do I have a markup tool? I don't know how the markup tool works here. So we have these two island assemblies. So if you look at this circuit breaker on the right, you can see the, let's see how to zoom in a bit. You can see this circuit breaker on the right. It's the same name as a circuit breaker on the left. All right, they're both the same file name, but they have different model states. The model states are for the tag 1i property and the height. And the same as this one. So that it's going to be changing the height from one to the other. Okay. So we have the one part, this is one IPT with different model states being able to have different situations. So now we bring those two model states, item parts, into our higher assembly. And now we can say, I want this model state to be a certain height, and this one to be a certain model state, and this one to be a certain model state. And with that, I can suppress tagging. I can change the I property tags. I can have that available. So when we get into that, you can see that that in model states, there's tables that you can confirm what's happening or overwrite if you need to. And that's what my webinar is going to be talking about. So if I come into here, you can see this guy here. This is obviously a cabinet circuit breaker. I got to give up my mouse. Let's give up my mouse out of here. and go back in here. Okay, so here's this cabinet circuit breaker. You can see I have some model states. You can see the model state is set for MS equals 16. If I expand the model states, you can see I got MS 16 and MS 9. So what's changing on these two, and this is what the webinar is going to be about, is you can see the tag is SH09, and here the tag is going to be SDH16. All right. So I'm changing the tag plate on here when I'm changing the model state in the assembly. You can also see the height changes. One is 16 and one is 9 inches. I still have my suppression model states if I want to use them. I got my foundations or my structures, which they're both the same, but I like to have them both, and I can come back into my model states. If I come into my model state master, this is the original bit. All right, so you can see what's happening here on how this is changing with model states, and it's going to affect the way we do the workflow for design checks, and that's why I need that webinar. I'm going to open up the individual part. And it's not saving the home position in 20. This is 2022 I'm working in here. The other one was 2023. I don't have 23 on this machine we're looking at. So you can see our part here. And in here we have those two model states. So if I expand the model states, I have master, right? I have model state at height 9. I got model state at height 16. If we look at the I properties, custom, you can see it's H16 is the model state tag number for that model state. And here's my 9. I can come into the, and you can see the tag is SH09. So I call these instance model states. And we have suppression model states. So that's what the way I look at it. These would be a suppression model state. I'm activating this assembly and I'm suppressing items just like level of detail used to work. When I come into MS09, I'm changing instances. So I'm changing the instance of this IPT to have those different states. What it will do is allow us to have less items in our, less components in our substations. Especially with switches, we can have many, many switches in there. So when you're working with model states, and I'll bring this up in that webinar. Let's go back into here. When you're working with model states, you can confirm what's happening. We have tables that looks a lot like the I parts, and we have those choices. So I'm going to do one other thing. I'm going to come into back into this guy here. When 2023, and now I'm back into 2023, I was just in 2022. In 2023, what I really like about 2023 is the bill of material tool that came in with this one. So if you look at this, doesn't look much different than the 2022 and previous. But what a key thing here is this settings up here, these BOM settings here, that we are able to do this. So I come on in the BOM settings, hide suppress components or renumber items sequentially. So of course I can't do that in model data, but if I come over to structured, I have both those options available. So what's happening with model states is because we're turning things on and off in that model states, in 2022, you may see a 0 total in the bill of material. When you look at the bill, it will be 0. And then you'd have to hide that line if you don't want a 0 going to purchasing. In my past, if I sent a 0 to purchasing people would not know what to do. They want a quantity and they're 0. They'd be all confused and not knowing, and they'd come and bug me. So here, if I go and hide suppressed components, I will not get a 0 in my bill of material. renumber items sequentially. Typically you want that. Like so often I want to renumber my bills of material and therefore my parts list as well, because the parts list is reading this. I want to renumber my numbers, item numbers in my BOM, so that I'm always starting at the number 1, or I don't have the jumble of item numbers in different order. So this is what I really like about 2023, but 2023 does not have a service pack yet. I know they're having a service pack being released soon. I don't know when that is by Autodesk, but if you're going to migrate to 2023, you want to wait till at least one service pack is out. So that's really all I had for this talk, is just to talk about what we're coming out with and what we're happening and getting this release. And it should be released next week. I don't even have a date on here because I don't want to say when it's going to be released for sure, but I'll say this month. I'll say this month will be released.
Way to cover there, Steve.
Now, if you wish, we have time. I can talk about the model states, the substation modeling strategy with model states. I don't think it's a big change. If we want to fill time, I can talk about that. If you guys have questions, please ask. It's fine to ask. So if I look at this document here, it opens. So right down in the title, it says with model states, and I start talking about model states in here. So it's much the same as the other one. It's just a little bit of detail on model states because I want everyone to understand it. So in the beginning of this modeling strategy document, in both documents, I explain some key tools that we use with Inventor and explain a little bit of those uses. I'm separating model states to talk about suppression and instance because I see them as two different ways of using that tool. We still have linked model states, just like we had linked levels of detail in the past. I think the linking is excellent. I was talking to a customer and they are linking view reps by iLogic, and it's pretty cool what they're doing. It's fairly complicated, but it's cool that they can link view reps. So it's an interesting way of working with Inventor. I think it would be a good thing to have as a productivity tool. What we also have with model states is the factory scope and member scope. That's another thing I'm going to be talking about with the webinar, hopefully June 1st. I'm trying to cover myself there too, Josh. But you have member scope and factory scope. So if I want to change all my model states, I'm going to have to be in factory scope. If I only want to change one model state, I want to be in member scope. So that's a key thing to work with when you're working with the model states. And I talked about the bill of material. I think it's worthwhile. I think 2023, just for this button, I would like it. 2023, if you watch the Autodesk talk, they did a welcome to Inventor 2023 talk. They spoke about performance enhancements and some other things behind the scenes we don't really see with 2023 that I like as well. A lot of the performance enhancements in Inventor are with the newer chips. You can have a 4 gigabyte, 4 gigahertz chip purchased today that will behave faster with the software than the 4 gigahertz chip purchased 5 years ago. It can be the same clock speed, but it will perform faster today. So this is what is being leveraged by the software manufacturers to be able to take advantage of that. So my performance note document has also updated as well, and I should have had that on the list now that I'm talking about that. So now if we come down into the meat of the document, empty parts. So here I talk more about the model states on how to use them with islands and how you may want to work with them. And here's that view again, because I want to really stress that how we can really leverage these model states to keep that we only have one circuit breaker assembly, that we can have all kinds of tagging on that, or switch. Like how many switches are in a substation? You know, you don't have to have a different file name for each tag anymore. So I don't have to have 20 file names for one switch. I can have one file name for that switch with 20 different model states. So it's just a different way of thinking.